Hey y'all, welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. This is our 12th episode. And if you're new to our channel, welcome. Like, share, comment, and subscribe below. We'd love to have you stick around. Tonight we're looking at something rather new here at Bourbon and Bones. A little bit of speculative and also possibly even a little cutting edge. Now the majority of this information for this episode came from a friend of ours, and he sent us a variety of pictures and of a recently approved and unannounced and unadvertised release of McAfee's Benchmark. Now many of you all have seen this on the shelf, but the $8 price tag for a fifth may have actually scared you away. However, this is a little sleeper out of Buffalo Trace, but was not actually invented by them. So let's dig into the history. So during the dark ages of bourbon, the 60s and 70s, vodka, gin, and wine were king. And Seagram's 7, you may know them from Seagram's 7 American whiskey, their gin, Seagram's vodka, Seagram's wine coolers. Seagram's was actually out of Montreal, Quebec. In the 1990s, Seagram's was also king. They produced the most alcoholic beverages in the world. And to try to break into the marketplace of bourbon, mainly up against Maker's Mark and Jack Daniel's out of Tennessee, they launched Benchmark Old No. 8 brand bourbon. They made it at the Four Roses Distillery, and at the time they released it in a decanter style bottle, and it was kind of a cocktail bourbon. It was something maybe not to be sipped on specifically, but would make great cocktails. And it was to compete directly against and take over some of the marketplace share of Makers and Jack. And it did pretty well overall. To give you an idea of how Seagram's was doing at the time, they actually bought MCA, which is the parent company of Universal Studios and all of the theme parks. They also bought 25% of DuPont Chemical. So these are, at the time, were pretty much the two largest companies in America. And they imploded after that. And there's a lot of speculation about why, but for sake of our conversation, they did in fact implode. So they sold off a variety of their lines piecemeal. And in 1989, Sazerac picked up the line and began producing Benchmark and Buffalo Trace. And at the time, actually, it was just Stag Distillery. And they were using the mash bill number 1, which is what Buffalo Trace is now made from. So after Sazerac purchased it, the Benchmark picked up the name McAfee. And at that point, little else changed. It has been a very cost-effective standby for Sazerac for decades. But the information we recently received brings this product into a brand new light. Now, Benchmark is currently an 80 proof bourbon, and that is going away completely and being replaced by Top Floor. Now, the label itself even says elevation matters, and this is actually a reference to the position in the rick house. Now, the top of rick houses actually are the hottest part of the house, and it's where bourbon kind of cooks the fastest, and it doesn't quite get the depth of some of the characteristics of some of the lower positions, but it still tends to be some nice bourbon to draw from. And Benchmark typically is the top of the brick house anyways, but they are upping they're actually upping the proofage a bit as well here. Now the next expression that Benchmark is producing is small batch. This is a 90 proof, and the label says it is a blend of select casks, making a small batch expression, something that is currently not what Benchmark is known for. Then there's the single barrel, and one I'm kind of most interested in trying, and that's going to be coming in at 95 proof. These are barrels selected by the master distiller as good enough or interesting enough to be set aside as a single barrel. Next, full proof. And now Buffalo Trace has very few full proof expressions, and this one will be coming out at 125 proof. That is very hot. The label calls this extra strong, and I kind of feel like that's a bit of an understatement. Finally, and perhaps most excitingly, bonded, 100 proof, and is the second only expression out of Buffalo Trace that is Ball and Bond, and the other being Colonel E.H. Taylor. So now the question is, why all these new expressions from a little-known bourbon from Buffalo Trace? And we have a hypothesis here at Bourbon and Bones, perhaps even a theory. But I'll stick with hypotheses for now. We'll see how it plays out. So Jim Beam, a few years ago, began releasing several expressions that are all priced around the $25 mark and kind of took a huge part of the bourbon market, of the kind of the under $25 range. And in contrast, Buffalo Trace has been producing bourbon that is in the $25, $50, $80 range and is really, really sought after. They kind of have that upper mid-range market pretty much on lockdown as desirability goes. And what they've been missing is that lower range market. And yes, Buffalo Trace itself for a fifth is around a $25 mark, but there's very little underneath it that is well known or well sought after below that price point. That is, until the Benchmark releases. Apparently most of these will be sold under the $20 mark. Now the full proof is probably, if I were to guess, going to be the $30, $35 mark, because it is a lot of concentrated bourbon. But I feel like most of them are going to be in the $15 to $20 range. I have not found a press release about this. Buffalo Trace hasn't made a big deal about this. I feel like they would have if COVID-19 hadn't hit, and it would have been a big extravaganza at the distillery. But because of it, they've just kind of been slowly releasing them quietly out into the public. So I'm very curious to see what you think of our hypotheses here. Do you think we're right? Do you think we're wrong? Please let me know in the comments below. And with all this speculation and research and history, let's finally dig into the bourbon. So I'm going to pour out about 2 ounces here. And before we start, just to let you know, this is a great bourbon to mix with. If you get your hands on it, throw it in a cocktail. I think you'll like it a lot. A nice little spin. And right on the nose, it's like a honeyed kind of candiness. It's lots of honey, but it's like kind of like Bit-O honey candy bar, if you're old enough to remember those. Light caramel notes, almost like a toasted caramel. It's very delicate, very nice. And on the palate, it's very light, but it is kind of like a Hershey's caramel sauce. Just a lightly there, a little salty, a little bit of that corn sweetness, just a little bit of corn flavor from it. And there's a bit of a salty, kind of reminds me of Fritos, kind of that salty corn chip kind of ness to it. In a good way, I promise. But the finish actually lingers a little bit. It's a little bit of a spice bill, and there's still that honey candy kind of hangs on at the end. So very interesting. So what we're going to do, as always, we're going to take a quick little break, throw some water into this, see how it evolves or de-evolves, and we'll be back in a moment. Stay with us. So welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. It's been about 10 minutes here in YouTube land. And so we've thrown a little bit of water in here, and we're going to give it another taste and see how it does. And so right away, the honey is very much forward. The caramel's pulled back. It's almost like a little bit of a brown sugariness, but far less of a caramel development. but you still have that bright honey candiness. And on the palate, you actually lose of that caramel sauciness to it. It's actually just a lot more corn and a little bit of salt, and so that kind of like chippiness to it, that salty chip. There's caramel there, but it's just kind of like toasted caramel right on the edge. It actually just almost turns into a bit of a corn whiskey. Not in a bad way, but it does really change with a little bit of water. And so to our favorite part of the episode, the verdict. So for me, Benchmark 8 is one of two things. It is a nice little cocktail mixer, and it is a nice end of the night bourbon. Are you gonna write home about it? No. But if you've had a full proof of something, if you've had something more complex, if you've been chewing through a glass or two of something, and you kind of feel like that one more would be nice, something like a Benchmark is going to kind of drift you right on into bed. It's a really nice, mellow bourbon. Easy to sip through. I would say neat is going to be a little bit more complex than with a bit of water. But if you have an opportunity to get your hands on one, give it a shot. It's $8. If it's not bad, you can just cook with it. I mean, it's nothing to throw out by any means. I personally, though, can't wait to get my hands on the new expressions. I think it's going to really elevate Benchmark in a way that was really unforeseen before. And I think it will actually put Benchmark on a lot of people's map and have to get a hold of lists. And I'm excited to see what you think. If you've tried it before, if you're excited about the new expressions, let us know. And so finally, our final transition for the evening, of course, is always into the bones portion of the episode. So tonight, since we've been talking about some speculative bourbon, we are actually going to talk about a speculative bone. And this is actually kind of the fun part of paleontology, piecing history together like a detective. And oftentimes, the hardest part to figure out is where a specimen was actually found. And this is, if you don't know where that is a huge determining factor of paleontology. If you know where something is from exactly, you have a better idea of what time period it came from. So this specimen here was actually a birthday gift from my aunt and uncle many years ago. And they actually found it at a flea market down in North Carolina. And it was allegedly from the western part of the United States. Now this means that if that were true, most likely time period it comes from is the later Cretaceous or the Eocene, mostly due to the size of the bone, which is somewhat reasonable for the era. The megafauna from those times would lead to larger bones. So looking closer at the specimen here, you actually see it's a bit of a spinal piece. And looking at the broken pieces from the top and the bottom, this rather indicates that it's actually a tail piece. For me, this rules out the Eocene, because mammals who took over the megafauna space after the dinosaurs did not have large counterbalancing tails that would have required this kind of shape. So I feel that the later Cretaceous is most likely to be what time period this bone is from. Now, I've spent many years researching the possibility of what this bone belongs to. I've also contacted several paleontologists over the years, and to me this is one of the most amazing parts of the story, is I just emailed them out of the blue. I went on the website, the university websites, and found them, and I just said who I was, what I was studying, and asked if they could help me identify the bone. And they all have responded. They helped me narrow down what is most likely the tail vertebrae of a Triceratops. Here is a side-by-side picture of my specimen with a complete tail vertebrae picture of a Triceratops. And as you can see, it has the double-sided hole for the spinal system to run through. Up above it, it has the two side pieces that stick out a little bit, and it's leading down the tail of the Triceratops. And also, there are some interesting indications that this trike was actually still growing because the porousness in the bone. Now, some of the holes in this specimen are most likely just due to replacement issues. So as the minerals replace the calcium in the bones, a lot of it was just kind of left out. But if you look very closely, and here's some good close-up pictures, you actually can see the original soft tissue was still very porous. And the younger an animal is, mammalian or dinosaur, the more porous their bones are. And as they grow up, they become more and more solid. So as they grow, they fill with more calcium, and that's why little kids tend to bounce and adults tend to break their arms. If you ever find something that you can't identify, do your research as much as you can, and then don't be afraid to ask for help. You might be amazed at the assistance that people are willing to give you if you just ask for it. And so tonight, we've had fun looking at a new, old brand of bourbon, some detective work with an amazing dinosaur, one of the most popular in the world. And if you like what we're doing here, please comment and subscribe below. And also join us on Facebook and Instagram. You actually get a little bit more updates about what we're doing. You actually can join some of our polls. For us, it's a lot of fun, and we hope you join us there. And remember, share a bourbon with someone. Good night.